Okay, it looks like
I-
we have gone live. Just take a couple moments here for everything to start working.
Yep, I see it popping up on my end.
So do I. I could take a shower of rain or two over here if we get them.
You know, they're planting so fast over here and getting her in. I'd say hold off on the showers a few days and they might have the rest of the corn in. It is just going, I mean, it's been smooth.
Into the night, and yeah. But I think next week is supposed to be raining next week, so.
Got rain yesterday and we're getting more today, so they've been holding off for a couple days over here.
I want my oats and my brome to get some water.
You got them in now?
Yeah,
Did you plant them into any moisture or was it pretty dry when you planted them?
it was pretty dry, but it was all tilled.
I got you.
Right. Well, just making sure everything's working here. It looks like we're good to go. Let's just go through and just quickly introduce who's on the call today, and then we'll get started with our topic about terms and conditions.
Tom gets to go first.
Partner and auctioneer, land broker with Jason and Nicole. I'm located here in the Winterset area and take care of the office in DeSoto.
I'm Nicole Smith. I am a co-owner with Jason and partner with Tom. I am also an auctioneer. I got started off on the online portion, and now I kind of fill in wherever needed and more on the administrative side.
My name is Jason Smith. I'm a land broker, auctioneer, appraiser, kind of a jack of all trades in our space. I was the original founder of Dream Dirt, and I did so with the vision that we could create a different service and sort of breathe new life into an exhausted industry. We always hope that Dream Dirt is different than any of the other offerings out there, and that we're a company that really has the seller's interest in mind. We think that we do a really good job at that. Always completely fair with buyers, but a place that sellers can find sort of a safety net, a place that they can feel safe and get good advice.
Thanks, everyone. And I'm Kristen Lau, Communications Manager. I'll just be asking the tough questions today. And anybody else who's watching can also drop any questions you have in the comments, and I'll be sure to watch for those as we're going and get those asked to our experts here today. So
and we should also have a lot of our agents who are watching as well today that can help answer questions. If anybody has any or has any need, they'll be in the comments section as well.
Yeah, exactly. So lots of resources here today to help answer questions. And today the topic is a little different. We're talking about terms and conditions. While we don't talk about this a lot on a lot of our social media outlets, it's really, really important and something that all of our clients must have for their sales, and something that Tom and Jason and Nicole work with on a daily basis. So we're talking about terms and conditions today. And for those watching who aren't familiar, can someone explain what we mean when we say terms and conditions?
I can do that, Kristen. Terms and conditions really are kind of the meat of the auction. Terms and conditions are really what guides the buyer's participation. It guides the seller's performance. It guides exactly how things are going to happen. And terms and conditions are not unique to just auctions. They also occur in listings. And I want to help everybody understand the difference between those things. So if we talk about listings and auctions, both have terms and conditions. The only difference is in an auction, the seller sets the terms and conditions. But in an offer, the buyer originally sets the terms and conditions, and then the buyer and seller will negotiate the terms and conditions. With an auction, terms and conditions are not negotiable. The seller sets them in the beginning. They become kind of the meat and potatoes of the process. They guide the relationship, they guide the seller's performance, the buyer's performance, and it sets everything in stone prior to bidding. So with an auction, the seller sets terms and conditions and the buyers bid according to those things. And with a listing, the buyer will originally set the terms and conditions, and then the seller will respond to those.
And when, I know my next question you've kind of already answered, but are terms and conditions for auctions or are they for listings too? I know for our auctions, you write out all the terms and conditions, correct? But for a listing, would a buyer necessarily have to put those to pen and paper?
So
You
yeah,
don't
I mean, typically they would, and I'll let Tom answer that one.
you don't see a whole lot of unless there's it's kind of more of a disclosure on the listing, I would say, somewhat. But you don't see a whole lot of written out terms and conditions on the listing.
It sounds like for the auctions, it's more set in stone. They have more control over it, and it's on the seller's court of how to set those.
Absolutely. So the terms and conditions will follow an auction from beginning to end. So all of the advertising is going to have the terms and conditions. The website listing is going to have the terms and conditions. The bidding site's going to have the terms and conditions. So the buyer can read all of that through our advertising, through our outreach to them. And then that is going to be committed to a purchase agreement. The purchase agreement is going to follow the terms and conditions. So in other words, it's going to document it. Historically, you'll be able to go back and look at those terms and conditions through the purchase agreement document and always have those things. And everybody has to perform by those. They are the terms and conditions are the beginning of a contract between the buyer and the seller. So by placing a bid, you are agreeing to the terms and conditions. With our online bidding platform, a person has to agree to the terms and conditions prior to being able to place a bid. So there's a small box on there that will not allow anybody to bid until they have read and agreed to the terms and conditions of the auction. That's one great thing I really like about the online auctions versus a live auction. With a live auction, we go to the front of the room and we read the terms and conditions. So there's sort of that 5-10 minutes in the beginning of an auction where we'll go up, we'll read the terms and conditions, and everybody in the room is assumed to have heard those and understand those prior to, if they didn't ask any questions and they place a bid. But with an online auction, they have to physically do something. They have to physically check a box to say, I read this and I understand the terms and conditions. That way, after the auction, there is no disagreement. They were served to you in writing. So when a person agrees to them, we also email them a copy of them just to be, 100% positive that there's no disagreement that somebody didn't have them or didn't read them, whatever it might have been.
Awesome. So for these terms and conditions, it seems like a lot of times our client, like we have some terms and conditions that are pretty usable for most of our clients' cases. But in some clients' cases, I know there are some special terms and conditions they can put in there to kind of customize how they want their auction to look. Can we have a story or an example of a special case that has required special terms and conditions to be set?
Kristen, we've had some sellers require a bank note. That's not something we require. And it's a common question that sellers ask me. And some of them do. They say, we want to know that who we're dealing with has the funds to participate in our auction. So that's something that can be put in there. Some of our sellers even offer to be the banker. They'll say, I'm willing to do this. If somebody's interested, we'll sell it. We'll establish the price and we'll carry the loan and treat it just like a loan, like a bank would. And if they want to use that option, we're willing to do that. So, that's one thing when Jason and I or Nicole or whoever, when we're talking to somebody about an auction, they think they don't have total control of the auction. It kind of makes them fearful. And what we're talking about today is something that really, really puts them in total control of their auction. And that's what I always tell them. We're going to set the terms and conditions, and when we place that and we advertise it, those are the rules and they're not changing for anybody. Something else that gets put in the terms and conditions, renters or rent credits and stuff like that, how that stuff's going to play forth. So all that stuff falls in this.
And I'll add a little bit to that. Every aspect of the auction is a part of the terms and conditions. So somebody's saying, well, give us an example of a term and condition. The closing date is a term and condition. The rental split, the tax prorations are a part of the terms and conditions. The possession, the tenancy, the amount of money that's put down, the earnest deposit, whether the earnest deposit is refundable or non-refundable. All those are parts of terms and conditions. So just a really typical terms and conditions of an Iowa farmland auction would typically be, you know, there's like an earnest deposit, 5-10%, or maybe a flat fee that's put down. There would be a closing date that's put in there. There would be terms and conditions that deal with how title is going to pass. So in Iowa, of course, we use abstract, but a lot of our surrounding states, we use title insurance. All of those things are going to be spelled out. Every family is going to have different needs. You know, we have an auction right now that, as an example, is subject to court approval. That's a part of the terms and conditions. And that's the reason the auction process can fit everybody in every situation, because they are customizable to the nth degree. There isn't anything about the sale, the terms and conditions of the sale. If we say it that way, people might understand it better. The terms and conditions of the sale, there's nothing about that you can't customize. What you do is you just have terms and conditions written that very specifically fit your situation. So if you say, well, you know, I want to sell my farm in July, but I have a tenant on it. You deal with that in terms and conditions. You use the terms and conditions, first of all, to inform the buyers, hey, there's already a tenant on this farm. You can't farm it this year. And then secondary to that, you would come up with some sort of a proration of the income for that particular year. And again, you're going to deal with that in the terms and conditions. And all you do is you take the real situation that exists, you convert that to text and writing, and that becomes the terms and conditions for their sale. And we've done some that were extremely complicated terms and conditions. Go ahead, Tom.
One that's coming to mind after we got to talking about this, and it's probably the most unique that, for me anyway, I don't know about you, was the farm that we sold that had a lifetime lease on it. Yeah. that had 2 right of refusals. And it was in the terms and conditions, and we wrote the auction up, and the people participating and bidding understood that. We did sell the farms after going through all that, and they understood that they had a lifetime lease on them. So we had
a really successful auction on that too. And, you know, that was because all the buyers were informed. They all knew exactly what was happening. They knew what they were bidding on. So every time you're bidding on an auction, you're bidding on something differently. And Tom's example is a really good one, where you're bidding on a farm with a lifetime lease, you know, or when a life estate is being sold. You know, the terms and conditions of that inform the buyers of what they're actually bidding on, and they're going to find their tolerance or the value in that for them specifically and bid accordingly. The best way to keep yourself out of any legal harm is to make sure that your terms and conditions are right on. I mean, as long as everything is disclosed in the terms and conditions and you have accounted for every possible tiny little detail, it's smooth sailing. You're going to go right on through, and buyers are going to really appreciate the fact that they were informed of every little detail.
And don't you think that helps them, the buyers, also feel more comfortable in their bidding when everything is spelled out for them and they feel like everything is out there?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think that buyers always appreciate honesty in the sense that it gives them a certain comfort level. They're able to feel good about the process. And then the performance for the seller is going to be a lot better all the time.
It lets them also know that the rules aren't going to get changed halfway through.
Right. And you know, the best thing about that, Tom, is that applies to both sides, buyer and seller both. Terms and conditions are concrete and they are set in stone. I can't think of a time, and I'm going through my mind right now, where I can ever think of terms and conditions being changed. So, you know, once the bidding is over with, and this sometimes gets a little bit confused. People sometimes believe that they can do this as a bidder, that they can come in and request some sort of a change. Like, well, you might remember one that I did in Plymouth County, where we did the terms and conditions and we said the taxes were prorated to the date of closing. And then the buyer somehow thought that we would pay the taxes until like his second year. And I don't remember exactly all the details of that. But you can't change them. That's the great thing about it, is everybody knows up front exactly what's happening, and you can't change them afterwards. So you can't, if the terms and conditions said there would be no survey, there will be no survey. A buyer can't come in afterwards and say, well, I want to do a survey. They can still do a survey. They just have to do it at their expense. Having laid all of that out ahead of time, there's no gray areas. And that's the one thing about terms and conditions. You don't want to leave any gray areas. You want to make sure that you address every particular detail, do all your research first, and make sure the sale is laid out in a very easy and to understand and organized way.
Yeah, we have lots of people commenting on Facebook Live. A lot of our agents are saying hi and good morning.
Good morning to all of you guys. I hope you're having a great day.
Stephanie says she remembers the auction that you gave an example of earlier, the one with the really complicated terms and conditions. She's been around for a lot of them.
Stephanie gets the worst of that. She gets to sort through all of the details afterwards, and we appreciate Stephanie very much. She takes a lot of work off her plate and does some super complex stuff for us.
Yeah, she's great. And anybody who's watching, you can drop questions in here. Aaron Drewillow, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, just seems a little incredulous that people don't read the details of an auction like crazy. But yeah, there are people out there who don't read them, but they're still there and they're still bound by them.
If I could address one thing that happens on the internet with internet bidding, it is people reading things. Nicole herself just had an auction that was, it was a personal property auction. And, she really clearly laid out the rules of it, and still afterwards had a lot of people wanting to break the rules. The terms and conditions are so important when you're bidding on something. You have to read them and you have to understand them. You can't come in afterwards and say, well, I'm going to pick my stuff up on Thursday, if it's a personal property auction, when the terms and conditions clearly said, pickup was on Saturday and Sunday. So you need to make sure, it's not that we can't bend a little bit here and there on those things that only affect the auction company. We will never bend on things that affect the buyer-seller transaction. But you have to read those things. It's very important.
We were talking about this a little bit. I don't know if there's any other points you guys want to hit on this, but how do terms and conditions help the seller, and how do they also help the buyer?
I think a lot of it we've covered that it lays out the guidelines of how this is being sold, whether it's personal property, whether it's farmland, whether it's machinery. It lays out how you're going to participate and what the sellers is going to do. If I'll just throw out, for instance, a tractor or something, and they know something's wrong with it, yet they want to fix it. It's all spelled out. Me as a seller, I have this. I'm going to sell this. I'm going to guarantee it to you to work. If it doesn't, then you don't own it. It gives it the rules, the guidelines, and the comfort of how things are going to be done.
Kristen, I think something we should mention too is that terms and conditions can really be the thing that determine the value. So as you go through writing your terms and conditions with your auctioneer, and realize the auctioneer does not set the terms and conditions. The auctioneer does not own the assets. We'll provide you with the professional guidance and advice of all of our experience and our knowledge, but it's up to the seller really. So, how that would typically work out is we would sit down at a table or talk on the phone, and the seller would say, so this is the situation. And then we would say, well, this is the term and condition we would recommend to address that particular thing. We're giving advice. When they agree to that, then it's going to be committed to the actual terms and conditions. And one particular area that really comes to mind is setting an earnest deposit. So an earnest deposit is a really important thing. It's not just like a random figure, 5%, 10%. You have to really think about that. So if you're going to have a farmland sale, and there's going to be an earnest deposit, that earnest deposit, you have to understand, could come into play that if the buyer doesn't perform, then it's going to be forfeited. So you want to make your earnest deposit non-refundable. Because if it's refundable, that doesn't have the teeth to hold the buyer into the transaction to the closing table. But if it is a non-refundable deposit and they put down a substantial deposit, let's say 10% on $1 million farm, they're risking a lot of money to not perform. And what a seller has to do in setting that is they really have to sit down and think out, let's say that the buyer does back out eventually. And I only asked them to put down $10,000. Would $10,000 cover my expenses of having had this auction And the auctioneer's expenses, the advertising, would that cover it? If it wouldn't, then you want to move it up a little. I think you always want to be cautious in setting an earnest deposit because people only have so much liquid capital on hand that they can actually pull from on the day of bidding. You know, certainly there's some people out there that have access to anything they want and can get it, but that's not the point. The point is that auctions work through competition, and you need multiple people to be bidding in order to move your price up. That's what you want to do. I mean, that's what you're looking to do when you sell by auction, is get the best price that you possibly can. So let's say that, you know, you're selling $1 million farm and you say you want a 10% earnest deposit, but you didn't really need that much. You are now limiting every bidder in the room that only, you know, has a certain amount of capital in the bank to make that earnest deposit on that particular day. So when they have exhausted let's say that they only have $70,000 liquid cash in the bank, but, you know, they're eligible to get a bank loan down the road, you know, 30 days before closing. And all of a sudden they have to stop bidding because they've run out of earnest money. It's not that they run out of purchasing power. Their purchasing power is still there. They can still get that loan from the bank, but they've run out of immediate capital for that earnest deposit because they have to write a check that day. And I think that's one of the things that sellers really need to consider. I know that's something we focus on. You know, in a lot of our auctions, we've been doing 5% because that's what the seller wants. But it is up to the seller to set the earnest deposit. We don't do that as an auction company. It's important because that's the seller's finances. The seller will have to deal with the aftermath if the buyer doesn't perform, not the auction company. So they need to make sure that that earnest deposit is adequate and it's going to cover all of their expenses. And that's the same with every term and condition that you set for any type of an auction. You need to be looking forward. You know, how does this affect, you know, non-performance down the road? How will things move forward? What would my expenses be? How can I make this worth the most amount of money? How can I pull the most value out of this? How can I make this look the best to the buyer? And Tom, I'll let Tom address it, but Tom and I have a saying that we always say, don't stack the deck against the buyer. That's the worst thing you can do as a seller. And if Tom wants to address that one, I think that that's something that he's dealt with a couple times and might make sense coming from him.
We have, you know, and I've talked to sellers about that after I've come across it myself. One of my first properties that we sold, the seller chose to push all the buyer premium or all the commission to the buyer, that they were going to pay our fees. The certain property had a house on it, which needed septic tank updated. He left that in there that the septic tank was at the buyer's expense to handle. I think those were the two common things on that, and it just really stacked the deck towards the buyers that you know, he didn't really have a successful auction on it because they were discounted. The buyers discounted because they had cost going into that. On the other side, you know, Jason, one of a great auction we had here in Madison County over by Maxburg is kind of the opposite side. The sellers set it up beautifully for a buyer. They offered a $10,000 credit. They knew the septic system was going to need updated, whether they kept the house or whether they didn't. And they offered a credit towards that at closing or however the buyer wanted it. And man, they had a fantastic auction. So you definitely don't, I mean, you're the one to benefit from it, the seller. You want to do the best that you can, but you don't want to stack everything against the buyer to incur all that cost.
And
I think that's
Mike Brantley tuned in the comments. He said that's music to his ears. Don't stack the deck against the buyer.
Mike is a good guy, and for those that don't know Mike, he's one of the best in the auction industry. He travels around the entire nation teaching auctioneers through auctioneers associations and stuff. He's one of the smartest men I know. He has a great blog, Mike Brantley Auctioneer, if you look him up online, if you wanted to learn more about auctions. And I know that I share that same sentiment with Mike and not stacking the deck against the buyers. And I know a lot of Mike's thoughts on those things. that is just something that I think as auctioneers and as an industry, we need to make sure that we steer clear of. And we need to, here's what I believe the problem is. It's so easy to walk into a seller and sort of buy that listing, say, I can do anything. I can save you money. I can get you the most money. That's really, really easy to do. It's sort of the lazy way out. It's a lot more difficult to push back against the client and show them why it's important to make this process fair, transparent, and open for everybody. And stacking the deck against the buyer is just really a ridiculous mistake on a seller's part. And anybody with any bit of common sense can look at that and say, that's not going to work. Sellers are never going to be, or buyers are never going to be accepting of that, in the sense that everything gets pushed on them. I won't say that that's 100%, because sometimes we do that in estates. But estates are more typically a true auction where there's no reserve, there's no games behind the scenes. You're looking at a package and you're going to buy it and you're going to understand the value of it. And you're going to fix the septic system and you're going to, buy it with no disclosure and a lot of those things. That's not really stacking the deck against the buyer. That's just a situation. And we deal with that on estates a lot of times. But again, it's going to sell because it's an estate. And so the buyer really is getting something back in that commitment from the seller in that particular situation. But it's not uncommon for us to get phone calls and saying, well, could we do this? And 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 we go, no way. Well, you can't hit the buyer 4 times and expect that they're going to treat you in kind with bidding. It just doesn't work that way. So, it's something we talk about a lot. I think that most people are reasonable people. We deal mostly with farmland. We don't hardly deal with much of that in farmland. It tends to more come with recreational structure, or not recreational, residential type properties. But it's an important thing for sellers really to understand that you can't stack the deck. Make a fair transaction for the buyer, and they will treat you really good. They'll treat you very kindly if you just do that for them.
Yeah, you guys tackled that even before I asked it, but the considerations that sellers should have when structuring their terms and conditions. So if there's any other considerations, but I think the main one is just don't stack the deck, and you guys have hit that really well. So let's kind of move into wrapping this up, keeping it short and timely, but how does Dream Dirt really assist our clients in the process of developing their terms and conditions?
For me, I think it has a lot to do with our outreach today. For example, here we are on Facebook. We just spent about an hour, and we spend about an hour ahead of time preparing for this. Trying to help educate people. Number one, I think it's really important that they just have a resource to go to and look at these types of things. We have free ebooks that people can request and get copies of those things, and they can learn a lot about that. Nicole and I spent yesterday, we looked at 1,100 acres in 3 different locations, and we sat down at kitchen tables with people that had read our ebooks, and they told us how much they appreciated the information, how much they learned, and it really opened their eyes. So we have those in a physical form or a PDF form. We can mail them to you, or you can request them online, and you can just download them straight to your computer. It's really fast. Another way is just the amount of knowledge and experience that we have. Our listing agreement is probably the number one instrument in setting the terms and conditions, because all of those terms and conditions, like I said, are going to follow through from beginning to end. Number one, they're going to be in the listing agreement. Then they're going to be committed to the advertising and all of our online, our websites and listing agreements. And then they're going to be committed to the purchase agreement. So those terms and conditions that are set in the beginning are going to follow the process all the way through to the end and be in all of the contracts that we go along. But back to that listing agreement, ours is set up really to commit those individual points. So our listing agreement doesn't miss anything. We know the most common things. Then, of course, we have a big blank that allows for anything that maybe is unusual or new or different about these things, where we can make notes and commit those into the listing agreement as well. So a lot of times it's just through consultation. They'll go through, they'll read our material, our blog posts, books, talk to us on the telephone, and we'll begin to kind of whittle that process down as we, take what we know and we listen to our clients, and we can recognize things maybe that they don't recognize, or see as an issue, and help them commit them or distill them down to one set of terms and conditions for an auction.
I think that's one of the main things too, is every auction can have unique sets.
Yeah.
So it's really listening to what the seller's story is and what they're trying to accomplish, and then having us as a professional help walk them through in determining what those terms and conditions should be.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, if you guys don't have anything else, I don't see any other questions in the comments. But yeah, for those watching on Facebook, reach out. Happy to send those ebooks out. You can email me directly at kristen@dreamdirt.com, or just find all of our contact information on dreamdirt.com. We have tons of resources. We have a quarterly newsletter, the ebooks. Our blog is full of information. And we like doing these live videos every week, and each week we have a different topic. So tune in on Wednesdays. We like to talk to you guys and kind of give out the nuggets of information that they've all learned throughout the years. So with that, that's all I had. So we'll wrap it up, and everyone have a good Wednesday.
I
Thank you,
appreciate it,
everybody.
Kristen. Thanks for putting
Thank
this
you.
together. See you all.